I am Ryan McKnight.
I'm Cara Santa Maria.
I am Christopher Smith.
Hi, I'm Andrew Torres.
This is Naked Mormonism,
the serial Mormon history podcast. We are joined once again by Johnny Stephenson. Where we last left off, we covered the history of Mormon polygamy and polyandry leading up to the Bennett meltdown. And now, listeners, hopefully if you've listened to the previous few episodes, the Bennett meltdown is fresh on your mind because we're going to be talking about it and how it impacted Nauvoo polygamy. And we'll also be talking about a number of the subjects that were impacted directly through this practice of polygamy. So we have a lot to talk about. Johnny, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me again.
Sure.
So where do we want to pick up? We have a kind of a lot of floating points out there from the last time that we spoke. And I think that it kind of, relating to what happened and transpired with Bennett and his expose, a lot of things shifted. And you made a couple of allusions in our last conversation that Joseph began marrying just virgin wives at this point, and that kind of plays into this whole narrative. So let's pick up there. Where are we going with this, Johnny?
Okay. There's two things that were going on early in Nauvoo. One was baptism for the dead, where Joseph was developing the sealing power. And this was a doctrine that was strange to people. It was new and innovative to them. Joseph was basically saying that, we need to form this link of people chained back to Adam so that everybody is linked together somehow. And Joseph Smith said that this would be through the power of the priesthood, and that Elijah would come and restore this priesthood. And they called it the fullness of the priesthood. This was going on. And at the same time, Joseph was marrying other men's wives. And if anybody wants to know more about that, I would recommend Dan Vogel's YouTube videos called Joseph Smith and Other Men's Wives.
Oh, yes.
It will give you a lot of background information on what was going on with that. But when the 12 came back from England, Joseph wanted to get them involved with what he was doing. And at this point, it didn't involve sealing for a number of reasons that I'll go into. But I wanted to bring up the 12 because what Joseph did to them, I think, was kind of cruel. He told them that he wanted their wives. He was testing them. He was seeing the limits that he could go to with these men so that he could get them on board with what he was doing. And he was testing them to see how much they were going to support him as a prophet. John D. Lee later said that Brigham Young told him that Joseph Smith was able to get away with a lot of things and do a lot of things that no other men would because his time was short on earth. And so Joseph was doing things that they thought were not, kosher. They were strange. He was claiming that some sin was not sin. And he was trying to get them involved in whatever his concept of polygamy was at that time, which was involved polyandry. And so he did a few things which were really interesting. And I want to quote Mike Quinn on this because what Mike Quinn wrote back in 2012 is really interesting. He said, Wilford Woodruff once wrote, the prophet went to the home of President Taylor and said to him, Brother John, I want Leonora, John Taylor's wife. It is said that John Taylor never answered the prophet, turned away and walked the floor all night. But the next morning went to the home of the prophet and said to him, Brother Joseph, if God wants Leonora, he can have her. That was all the prophet was after and said to him, Brother Taylor, I don't want your wife. I just wanted to know where you stood. And Quinn writes, although intended as a faith-promoting story of how President Taylor was tried as Abraham of old by the prophet Joseph Smith just after the revelation on plurality of wives was received, I don't believe it took place, and I think it took place earlier, but this sermon was notably silent about Leonora Cannon Taylor's reaction. 18 years after her death, the anti-Mormon book Mormon Portraits reported, Mrs. Leonora Taylor told ladies who still reside in this city that all the wives of the 12 were in fact consecrated to the Lord, that is, to his servant Joseph, and that Joseph's demands and her husband's compliance so exasperated her as to cause her to the loss of a finger and of a baby. The latter she lost by a premature delivery, being at the time in a delicate condition, and in her fury for help after Joseph's proposal, having thrust her clenched fist through a window pane, lost one of her fingers. This was consistent with Woodruff's later statement that her husband John Taylor acquiesced, but is there any contemporary evidence to support the rest of this hostile report? Yes, Leonora Cannon Taylor wrote a brief diary memoir with its last date as 28th of January, 1845, which she repeated those circumstances and affirmed her negative reaction. In her own handwriting, she recorded this concerning the death of her daughter, Agnes, in 1843. 1st of May, cut my finger with glass. It got very bad. My dear child took sick. My sweet baby died on the 9th of September, 1843, buried on the 10th. And on the 14th, I had the middle finger of my left hand taken off and buried with my baby. I had many trials about this time, but I am yet alive. Leonora Cannon Taylor was initially discreet in associating these trials with the trial of a polygamous proposal, later described by Mormon portraits and by Wilford Woodruff. However, after next referring to the 1844 martyrdom and after leaving one page blank following her above statement, she wrote the following version of her reaction to Joseph Smith's proposal of marriage. Written large, these words filled one page in the small book she used for her pre-1845 memoirs. Come, Joseph, don't be filling that up with bolt heads. How is your garden this year? I'll show you some summer apples, my lady. Oh, dear. So,
wow. Okay.
This little poem is filled with sexual entendres.
Yeah, no kidding.
She's saying, don't be filling that up with, I looked at the original and I think it says bolt thrusts, not bolt heads. Quinn is being generous here. And even Quinn says he thinks it might be bolt thrusts, but he's because the word is kind of scribbled. But don't be filling that up with bolt thrusts. How is your garden this year? Garden is a slang term for vagina. Mm-hmm. And I'll show you some summer apples. And of course, apples is a word for men's testicles. It also is a word for breasts. I'll show you some summer apples, my lady. Oh, dear. So, she was, according to Mike Quinn, very cognizant of the fact that this was a sexual proposal by Joseph Smith, that it wasn't only to try the 12, that he was actually wanting to have sex with their wives. And there's a lot of pushback about this, but it's an interesting theory that Mr. Quinn has. I thought I would relate that as one experience that these men went through with Joseph when he was trying to establish the polyandry part of his what he was doing.
Well, and that's oftentimes where these arguments will break down so much, because there isn't so much documentation about whether or not these marriages included the conjugal piece to the marriage, whether they did include that sexual intimacy, or whether they were just ceremonial sealings in order to seal Joseph Smith to these people and live with them forever and ever in Super Mormon happy heaven. And I don't think that those conversations are very helpful unless we are using them to then further understand or explain why decisions later down the line were made, or decisions prior to those interactions were made.
Well, what's interesting about Brigham Young is about the 12 is that Brigham Young married another woman, another man's wife, Augusta Adams Cobb. And she was living in Boston with a lady named Catherine Lewis, who wrote an expose about the first about the endowment ceremony in 1848. Mm-hmm. And what Brigham Young did is he brought Cobb back to Nauvoo, and she was married to Brigham Young. But what's interesting is that later on, she was dissatisfied with Brigham Young, and she wanted to be sealed to Jesus Christ. And so Brigham didn't go for that and wound up sealing her to Joseph Smith. And so
the next best thing.
Yeah. But in the 1860s, she wrote a letter, and it's really interesting what she wrote. She said, when I came to Nauvoo, you really weren't upfront with me, because I could have been with Joseph Smith instead of you. And she said, so what if Joseph Smith would have come to me and something would have happened? You told me not to be alone with him in the same room or I might be overcome by him.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
he wrote this.
that's pretty explicit. Wow.
Yeah, and she said, so what if I would have had a child? He would have been a king in Israel. And then we would have been sealed and everything would have been fine.
Okay.
That's what she wrote.
There's a lot to tease out of that, Johnny. There's a lot to take apart.
That's what Connell O'Donovan, that was his research. He's read all the letters of Augusta Adams Cobb and did extensive research on her, and I only got that from him, so I can't claim any credit for finding it. He's one of the best researchers on the planet, and I heard that he got out of researching Mormonism and was going to publish some books, and is not going to do that now, and I'm really brokenhearted about that because he had such great stuff.
But let's get back to the Cobb letter exchange, and her telling Brigham that her claiming that Brigham told her that if she was alone in a room with Joseph Smith, that Joseph Smith would have overcome her. I think that reveals a lot about the mentality, mindset, and motives behind Joseph Smith's polygamy. That is an extremely revealing exchange, in my opinion.
Here, I have it here. Let me read
Please
it.
Do. Yeah.
Depending on my summary of it, here's what she wrote, courtesy of Connell O'Donovan. If you had allowed me to have gone up to Nauvoo free and untrammeled in my spirit, I should have seen Brother Joseph the first thing. But instead of that, you extracted a promise of me that I would not see him alone, saying he could certainly overcome me. I replied, if he did, he would be the first man. You then said I never had to deal with a prophet of the Lord. Now suppose he had overcome me, and I should by that means have raised up a son or a king, if you please. Who would have been the wiser? Not Mrs. Catherine Lewis, most certainly. She testified about Cobb and Young's adultery in Boston, and she was labeled as an adulteress after that. And I should have been sealed to him, and all would have been right. That's what she said.
Okay. Wow. There's just there's so many coercive pieces wrapped up into that single exchange that it's even hard to try and tease out, even hearing the exact terminology that she used. Well, we'll just let that stand alone, listeners. You can do with that information what you will. So, Johnny, we have the Bennett meltdown that occurred, and there were some significant theological shifts, or at least clandestine shifts, at the time that Bennett went public, because suddenly Joseph's, one of his closest bosom friends, was, suddenly his worst enemy. Now the whole town is filled with shifty eyes, everybody wondering who the next exposeist is going to be. A lot of things transpired because of Bennett's expose. Let's get into the after effects and the theological implications and practices of polygamy resulting from that.
Well, what happened is Bennett, there was a little band of men that were going around to women and claiming that they could have intercourse and that there was no sin in it. Playing off Joseph's "some sin is not sin," and they were termed and they were also called spiritual wives, which Joseph was calling the women that he was involved with. So. William Smith, Joseph's brother, would go to the women and say that Joseph sanctioned all of it, as would Bennett, I believe it was Francis Higby, Lyman Littlefield, and a few others. They all would go to these women and have sex with them. And one of the women was Catherine Warren Fuller. And there's really an interesting thing that happened. She got married after this scandal, and William Smith wrote this little pun in the Nauvoo Wasp, which was a church newspaper. He wrote, "Till Hymen brought this his life delighted hour, there dwelt no peace in Eden's rosy bower." And this was what Quinn says, despite the apology of after announcing the marriage of Mrs. William Warren to Mrs. Catherine Fuller, both of the cities, he wrote those two lines of poetry, which till Hymen brought his life's delighted hour, there dwelt no peace in Eden's rosy bower. Basically saying that she's a ruined woman, and announcing it to the world. So William Smith, he gets caught up in this scandal, and Joseph Smith goes after Bennett. He's excommunicated. Lyman Littlefield excommunicated. A number of other men, Francis Higby, all of them. But the whole historical record is blank when it comes to William Smith. And
he was the brother of the prophet.
Go after his brother. Yeah. He tells the 12 apostles that his brother is special and that he needs to be left alone. And so Joseph, in 1844, when he was at another trial, he confessed that he covered everything up with the Bennett scandal. He confessed it. He said, the only mistake I made was covering it all up, and I'll never do that again. That's what he said in 1844. So he admitted that he knew about what was going on and tried to cover it up. And of course, he covered up his brother's part in it. And they tried to scratch his name from the documents that we have about all of the women who testified against Bennett and William Smith. I'm just going to add that part. But what happened is that this was tearing the church apart. And so the Relief Society was started. Emma Smith and all of them wanted to go after any of the women that were associated with Bennett or anything else. But Joseph was trying to stop it because he was involved with his own form of spiritual wifeism. And so there was a conflict going on there between him and the Relief Society.
A lot of historians have spent countless pages bickering about Emma's level of knowledge, when she came to understand to what extent she knew how many wives her husband had, because there were a number of wives living in the Smith household, whether in Kirtland, whether in Missouri, or whether in Nauvoo, that were Joseph's wives. And at some point, you have to say she knew. She knew, maybe not to the extent that historians know today. Maybe she only thought that there were a couple of them when there were more than 30 of them at the time. I mean, and we'll get into 132 momentarily, but there's where do you kind of come down on this, Johnny? What level of involvement or knowledge do you think that Emma had or played into the Nauvoo polygamy, especially as we get into, prior to July of 1843 and April of 43 with the Partridge Sisters?
Okay. What did Emma know? Well, she knew that Joseph had an affair with Fanny Alger. Oliver Cowdery said that Joseph confessed to Emma. William McClellan said that Emma knew about it later. So Emma, I think, understood Joseph's proclivities from an early on. In 1837, after the incident with Fanny Alger, she wrote a letter to Joseph, enclosed it that she hoped that he would stay pure. That's a red flag right there. I mean, who's going to write that to their husband? They were writing affectionately yours, this, that, and the other. And she writes, in 1837, keep yourself pure. She wrote it twice to him. Once she included herself and said, that we may stay pure, maybe as a couple. So, I mean, she was cognizant of the fact that he had this affair. So when we get into the Nauvoo period, all we can do is say, well, Emma must have thought this is all happening again. That's my take on it. So Joseph begins marrying these women and having affairs with them, or however you want to look at it. But the breaking point is John C. Bennett. John C. Bennett came out in 42, and he started saying Joseph was involved with all this. And so Emma... And there's an entry in Joseph's diary, I believe it's April 29th, 1842, and something about Joseph saying the peace of his household was disrupted, and there's some initials by that entry that JCB, John C. Bennett. So I believe that that's the point where Emma found out that something was going on with her husband, and I think she took it seriously. Then she begins her investigations in the Relief Society. Clarissa Marvel, who was a roommate of the widow of Don Carlos Smith, who Joseph had married. And so there were rumors around that Joseph was involved with Agnes Smith. And so Emma heard him, and she wanted to investigate Clarissa Marvel, and Joseph was trying to pull her back from that. So Emma was aware that things were going on, and she was wanting to investigate it and put a stop to it. So, and then we have the Eliza Snow incident, where in 42, they get married in the summer of 42, and there's this whole incident with, Eliza being thrown down the stairs, and if she was pregnant and couldn't have children. We don't know how much of it's true, how much of it isn't. There's scholars have been debating it for years, but something happened. And so Emma was aware, I think, from 42 on. I think she might have always in the back of her mind was watching Joseph to make sure, he wasn't doing these things. And so I think that she was aware early on what was going on.
Very early on, I would think. I mean, according to McClellan, she saw the transaction in the barn with Fanny Alger, and she had to be cognizant that Joseph had those proclivities. I think you said that very well. And I don't think that she expected when they went to Missouri or that when they went to Nauvoo that these would stop anytime soon. But I guess none of us, no historian will ever know to what extent she was aware. And obviously the Bennett expose exploding and the entire church, teetering on the crux of complete dissolution. A lot of conflicts and a lot of information must have come across her path that she had never been privy to that revealed to what extent Joseph Smith was involved in these extramarital affairs. None of us can put our mind there. None of us can understand what that must have been like, but we can see the shifts in theology and the shifts in the types of marriages that Joseph was taking after that time, after the Bennett affair exploded, and the proliferation of other Mormon elites practicing polygamous marriages. I think that kind of signals some information that we may be able to tease some tacit conclusions out of.
Well, in terms of what Emma knew, there's an account by Joseph Lee Robinson. He was the brother of Ebenezer Robinson, who owned the Times and Seasons and sold it to Joseph for $6,600 around the 1st of January 1842, I believe. But his brother wrote this. Ebenezer Robinson had edited the Times and Seasons for several years and had joined the church in Kirtland and had been through the Missouri Wars. And he and Don Carlos Smith were appointed to edit a paper for the church called the Times and Seasons, and his brother Carlos took sick and died on August 7th, 1841. Ebenezer carried on the paper. I knew that Angeline, Ebenezer's wife, had some time before this had watched brother Joseph the prophet and had seen him go into some house, and that she had reported to sister Emma, the wife of the prophet. It was at a time when she was very suspicious and jealous of him for fear he would get another wife, for she knew the prophet had a revelation on that subject. She, Emma, was determined he should not get another. If he did, she was determined to leave. And when she heard this, she, Emma, became very angry and said she would leave and was making preparations to go to her people in the state of New York. It came close to breaking up his family. However, he succeeded in saving her at that time, but the prophet felt dreadfully bad over it. He went to my brothers and talked to Angeline on the matter, and she would not give him any satisfaction, and her husband Ebenezer did not reprove his wife. And it came to pass that the prophet cursed her severely, and they thought it would not take effect because the prophet, was angry and supposing the offense was not sufficient to merit so great a curse. They came to me for advice, and they felt considerably bad over it. I told them I would do anything before he, the prophet, should curse me, but I saw they felt quite sanguine that they were not to blame. But I thought that I would not have a wife of mine do a thing of that kind for a world. If she had done it, she should get upon her knees at his feet and beg his pardon, or she should bear her own sins. There's a couple of anachronisms in there. This didn't happen after the revelation. It happened before the revelation. So at this time, the wife of Ebenezer Robinson sees Joseph go into this house he shouldn't be going into to see some woman, and tells Emma, and then Emma is on the prowl looking for Joseph, trying to have Joseph watched. So this is an interesting thing. What did she know and when did she know it? I think there's pieces in here that we can put together to tell us that I think that she knew Joseph very well.
Yeah.
And so I don't think any of it was a surprise to her.
Well, I want to also say that history isn't black and white, and whether she, was for, allowing this to happen, whether she was totally opposed to it, though that's far too reductionist and simplistic to look at this issue. It may have been the simple case that there were certain wives that Joseph took that she did approve of. Eliza Snow was one of her best friends, and then she was living in the home, and then she found the love letters, and, Eliza was pregnant, and then an altercation happened, and then, something came to a head, something shifted within the relationship, and it was no longer allowed. And I think if we are able to discuss the Partridge Sisters, I think that does reveal a little bit about where a lot of the nuance is kind of where the historical record does lend us a view into the nuance, because it is such a wildly complicated issue.
Well, here's my take on it. I don't think Emma was involved in any of the marriages. I think that she was opposed to it from the beginning and stayed opposed to it. I had my reasons, and this is why. Because when she found out about Eliza Snow, she booted her out of the house, and it was a violent altercation. When she found out about every single wife, she made life miserable for them and tried to rid herself of them. Let's take the Partridges as an example. Emily Partridge wrote a number of things about Emma Smith and her time in the Smith household. Their father died, and they were taken basically into the Smith home because Emma wanted them there, and they helped around the house. And then Joseph proposed to them both, and in February and March of 1843, he married them. And this was these were sealings. I believe that there was a double marriage, and I have evidence that I'm writing an article on it. And I gave a presentation at the John Whitmer conference last year where I detailed a lot of the evidence that I have about the Partridges. But what I believe is that they were married at the home of Heber C. Kimball together, and that Emma didn't know about it. And that here's where the story gets a bit complicated. Hiram Smith didn't know about polygamy either, and he started trying to root it out. And so we have Hiram Smith trying to root it out. We have Emma being opposed to it, and a lot of our information comes from William Clayton. Now, Clayton was involved with a woman, Deantha Farr, and he married her and got her pregnant. This was in April, I believe, of 1843. Joseph's trying to pull all these people into his spiritual wifeism with him. And so we have that going on. And we have Emma Smith and the Partridge Girls. Now, Emily and Partridge later in 1869 claimed that, well, I was married to Joseph in March or February, I believe. And 3 months later, Emma Smith, out of the blue, just said to Joseph, I'm going to give you 2 wives if I can pick them. Well, Emily said that took place on May 11th, 1843, the marriage that Emma was involved with. Well, that's a bogus date. She said they were married by Judge Adams, and he wasn't in town on that date. Emma went to St. Louis, I believe, or Quincy on that date. One of those two. I can't remember which one offhand. But she left early in the morning and was gone. So that date is bogus. So people then claim that, well, maybe it was the 23rd of May when Judge Adams was in town. But there's a lot that went on that day, too. Joseph Jackson, I don't know if you know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He was quite a character that wormed his way into Smith's inner circle to expose the prophet. And he was at the Smith house that day when staying there. And Emily and Joseph and Emma, they left early in the morning. Judge Adams showed up in the morning, and they had a conversation. Then they left and they went to the Smith farm, and then they came back in the afternoon. And then when they got back, Joseph Jackson was, I guess, he had been talking to Eliza Partridge, and Joseph got jealous about it. And so he went up and had a conversation with, I guess, Eliza to find out what was going on. And Emma came upstairs, and Joseph held the door so she couldn't get in the room when he was talking to her.
Oh, wow.
And this made Emma mad. And so Clayton said she was furious over the whole thing. So this is the date that people are promoting, that some historians are promoting, that they were married. And so it doesn't make any sense to me. They were married on that date. When? First, they don't explain that. And second, Emma's having this freak out over Joseph being alone in a room with her. So I just don't buy it that they were married on those dates. So
would you,
if you go back to Emily Partridge's temple lot testimony, she said that, well, if she was cross-examined and caught in a lie about that date, because she was promoting the date, and I don't want to say lie, but she misremembered it. Let's say, put it that way, and she's on the stand and she says, well, if it's not May 11th, then it had to be before that. So we have Emily herself saying that, well, maybe it was sometime before that, but we don't have Emma involved in polygamy before that. She doesn't become really involved in it until the revelation comes out. So the whole thing with the Partridge sisters, I don't believe that there was a second marriage. I don't believe Emma was involved in it. And like I said, I have a lot of evidence that would take way too long to go into.
Well, and that's why people should go to the John Whitmer conference and listen the next time that you present on that evidence. Well, and let's go ahead and pick up on that, because the revelation, the polygamy revelation, July of 1843, marked an interesting point in church history, because this is apparently after Hiram Smith had learned that polygamy was sanctioned of the Lord, that it was a commandment, that some sin is not sin indeed. And he apparently had a level of friendship with Emma that he was somehow able to convince her better of the divinity of the practice of polygamy, whereas Joseph Smith was, she was a little bit more opposed to it when Joseph Smith would approach her with these conversations. So eventually Joseph Smith got to the point where he needed to put down this revelation, and it may have been in response to the Partridge sisters, but it sounds like, according to your dating method, that this doesn't really have much to do with them, that maybe this was in response to another scenario that was going on in July. And they penned, Joseph and William Clayton penned D&C 132 as it came to become. So what happened? How did this revelation come to be, and how did things kind of transpire after that?
I think around this time, how did the revelation come about? Yeah. Well, I think the revelation came about because Hiram Smith accepted polygamy on May 26th, I believe, 1843. And Hiram Smith told a story in 1844 about how he was basically converted to the doctrine. What happened is he went to Joseph, and Joseph told him that you can have your dead wife sealed to you the same way that we use baptism for the dead to seal, and she will be with you in eternity.
Okay.
And you can have your present wife sealed to you, which I believe was Mary Fielding, and she will also be your wife in eternity. And Hiram Smith thought about it, and he liked that idea.
Huh. Okay.
And so this was how Hiram Smith was converted. And so, but there's a problem. Joseph had married all these women, but he wasn't sealed to Emma. And so they have a sealing ceremony for Joseph and Emma, and Judge Adams was there. And they sealed them together, I believe it was May 29th, just a few days after Hiram accepted polygamy. because I believe that they talked about it, and Hiram went, "Well, why aren't you sealed to Emma?"
Great question.
This is what I think happened, and so he's sealed to Emma, and I think that Hiram said, well, what does she know? And Joseph's like, I haven't told her anything, and so Hiram's like, this is crazy. We need a revelation. We need something, because it's Hiram that shows the revelation later to the High Council. And this is my own, speculation here. But I believe that it had everything to do with Hiram accepting polygamy, and that motivated Joseph to, number one, get his wife sealed to him, because everybody's saying that, Emma accepted polygamy, and that's the only way that Joseph would have her sealed to him. That was why he didn't do it before, because she wouldn't accept polygamy. But all of a sudden, in May of 1843, she accepts polygamy. And the Partridge sisters were her acceptance of it, and they were married on May 11th. There's a problem with this, a big problem. In August of 1843, Clayton wrote something in his diary. This is direct contemporary evidence that Joseph was not sealed to the Partridge sisters with Emma.
Okay.
I can't stress this enough. People can make of this what they want. They try to explain it away as not being written well by Clayton. But this is what it says. And I want you to listen very carefully to this, because this right here is direct evidence that Emma was not involved in their marriage. This is what Clayton wrote on August 16th, 1843. We returned and met President Joseph and some of the family going to the funeral of Judge Adams. PM. I went with Alpheus Young to look at a lot and called Sister Booths, who is in trouble. Robert Booth has gone away to work. Sarah Ann Booth is gone to Keokuk, and Elizabeth and husband is going to Chicago this morning. This AM, Joseph told me that since Emma had come back from St. Louis, she had resisted the priesthood, polygamy, in toto, and he had to tell her he would relinquish all for her sake. She said she would have given him Eliza and Emily Partridge, but he knew if he took them, she would pitch on him and obtain a divorce and leave him. He, however, told me he should not relinquish anything. Oh God, deliver thy servant from iniquity and bondage. So this is in August of 1843, 3 months after Emily claimed that they were married. And he said, and Joseph is saying, if he took them, Emma would pitch on him.
So
how could Emma have been at a marriage in May when in August Joseph is telling him that, well, Emma said she would give them to me, but if I took them, she would divorce me.
Okay.
So Emma never gave them to him.
So there's a multiple month disparity. And when we're looking back 180 years in the past, people might say, oh, yeah, off by a couple of months. What does that matter? That's really important. A few months can make a world of difference. So, Johnny, how do you reconcile that differentiation in the sealing?
Well, there's an account written by, you know who W. Blair was? He was one of the reorganized apostles, and he went to Utah and interviewed a lot of people about polygamy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Blair did an interview of someone that spoke to Emily Partridge 14 years before she gave her 1869 affidavit. And she said that basically that Emma found out about them being married and kicked her out of the house. She never mentioned Emma, anything about Emma going along with it, Emma doing this. She mentioned that. So what I believe is that there's this thing in the polygamy revelation. It says that Emma should not partake of the thing that I said that she should partake of. And what we have is, in May, William Clayton recorded that this AM, President Joseph told me that he felt as though I was not treating him exactly right and asked if I had used any familiarity with Emma. I told him by no means and explained to his satisfaction. So, Joseph was having all kinds of problems with Emma because she had discovered, I believe, in May of 1843, she discovered one of his relationships, and was, I think she was quizzing Joseph about it, or was looking around and saying, he's. Or she found out about William Clayton, and she knew that polygamy was not just spiritual. I think maybe she was told that for a time. It's just a spiritual thing. It's not, there's no relationships. And then, of course, Clayton's wife got pregnant, and Emma found out about that. But anyways, so leading up to that, but Clayton recorded in June of 1843 that Emma had treated him, Joseph, coldly and badly since I, Clayton, came. And he knew Emma was disposed to be revenged on him for some things. She thought that if he would indulge himself, she would too. He cautioned me very kindly, for which I felt thankful. So, Joseph's asking if Emma has any familiarity with him, and that Emma had said to him at some point, if you're going to indulge yourself with these women, I'm going to indulge myself too. And as the rumor has it, and Joseph, as history has it, Joseph Jackson and others said that it was William Law that Emma put forth as a spiritual husband for herself. Mm-hmm. And so Joseph apparently agreed to this, and his agreement hinged on the fact that Emma would pick a couple of wives for him. And so what Emma did is that she picked the Partridge sisters and said, yeah, you can marry them. And I'm not sure if Joseph suggested it to, maybe Joseph suggested it to her, said, hey, if you want William Law, can I have the Partridge girls? And Emma for a time agreed with it. Who knows why? But then Joseph produces the revelation. And like I said, I believe that he produced that revelation because Hiram Smith wanted him to. He pushed him to do it. And so Joseph produces the revelation, and then Hiram goes, well, now we've got a revelation, and I'm on good terms with Emma, and I can go and present it to her, and she'll be cool with all this, and it'll be a problem solved. I can explain it like you explained it to me. I mean, I was against it. Look, I came on board. He says, look, I'll take this to her, and everything will be roses. And, Joseph famously says, for Clayton, you don't know Emma as well as I do. And so, Hiram does, and he fails miserably, comes back. And so one of the reasons why I think that Emma blew up about polygamy was that in the revelation, Joseph says Emma is not to partake of the thing that we agreed on. Joseph reneges on his part of the bargain. Yeah. Her part of the bargain was to look the other way with the Partridge sisters. His part of the bargain was to give her William Law. So, and I think she only did this to get back at him. I don't think Emma was serious about it.
That's purely speculation.
Yeah, I know. That's why I said I don't think. Only because Emma was so against polygamy and so against and so for being pure. I don't think that I don't think that she was serious about it.
Yeah.
But anyway, she makes this bargain with him, and Joseph reneges. And so what happens? Emma reneges on her end of it and says, "No, I'm not giving you the Partridge sisters now." And so Clayton writes in August, "Well, Emma said she'd give them to me, but I know if I take them, she'll divorce me." So all of that was off. And then Emma, between July and September of 1843, gets more and more determined to stamp out polygamy. And she goes to, she finds some letters written by Eliza Snow in Joseph's pocket. She confronts Clayton about it, and thinking that he's involved. In July, Joseph's sitting at the dinner table, points at Emma and says, "This is my worst enemy in the world. My brother is my best friend, but she's my worst enemy." She goes and confronts Flora Woodworth, who she found out about somehow, and saw a gold watch that Joseph had given her, and took it and stomped it in the ground. This scared Flora Woodworth to death, and the next day she elopes with Carlos Gove, and they go to Carthage and elope, and that's off. And then the Partridge sisters, though, are still living in the home, and Emma made life miserable for them.
Yeah.
Emily writes about it. She says, she made our life a living hell, and that's what I believe happened. You want to marry Joseph? Well, it's not going to happen. And then after they moved to the mansion, she booted them out, and Lucy Walker left, and every wife that she knew about, she booted out of the house. So, and then she tells Bathsheba Smith, when she's giving endowments to these women, she says, your husbands are going to try to take spiritual wives. You got to put your foot down and put a stop to it. But she's telling the women, don't put up with this stuff. This is in September of 1843. Then Joseph secretly marries Melissa Lott, one of his last wives. Emma never finds out about her. She's living in the mansion. And she says in her Temple Lot testimony that she's asked, well, did Emma know about you? Nope, she didn't know about me. In fact, we never spoke the whole time I was in the mansion house. Emma and I never spoke. This is what Melissa Lott said. And so Emma didn't know about Melissa Lott, and there were secret passages in the mansion house where Joseph could get around. And so he's got her stashed in the mansion. And then Emma is just fed up with it. So Joseph, in October, he goes up and down the street and he announces there'll be no more plurality of wives. I forbid it. And he writes, this is written in his diary, and he's marching up and down the street out in front of his house, I think for Emma's benefit, right? And this is the polygamy thing that everybody latches onto and says, well, Joseph was trying to stamp it out. And this is where I think Emma got the idea that Joseph abandoned polygamy. But he didn't, because he told Clayton, I'm going to keep them all. I'm not giving up anything. But what happens at this time is that a month later, Joseph takes his last plural wife. And you know who that was? That was Fanny Young. That was Brigham Young's sister. And he marries her on November 2nd, 1843. And you know what happened 5 days later? Joseph got violently ill at the table. He got so sick that he dislocated his jaw, I believe. Yeah. Maybe not in that account. I can't remember. He got so sick that he thought he was poisoned. And he thought Emma did it. This is 5 days. This is a few days after he takes his last plural wife. Now, I don't believe Emma poisoned him, but I believe that Joseph believed it. So they go to the anointed quorum, and they don't wear their robes. They're arguing. Joseph tells it to Brigham Young, who later made all kinds of statements about it in Utah, that Emma tried to kill Joseph and poison him. And so, but I think that this incident, Joseph thinking that Emma poisoned him, it made him stop with the plural marriages, because he doesn't take another plural wife after Fanny Young. And then a few months later, Joseph has another bout. I believe he had bad ulcers, and Emma takes care of it. So I think by that time they had mended fences with things, and they went on. But this is the whole scenario that happens with Emma and the revelation and all of that. You know, she gets the revelation and burns it supposedly. And that's the progression of things that happen. We have the Lawrence sisters in there somewhere. You know, Emily stated that, well, this is what Emily's story was, that Emma had accepted polygamy for a minute, taught them about it, was enthusiastic about it. But then when the ceremony happened, she changed like Jekyll and Hyde and became this bitch that made their life miserable. And that she just did an about face as soon as the ceremony was over. But then Emily says that, well, she then agreed to do the Lawrence sisters. And that's the only testimony we have of Emma accepting marriages, those four women. But does it make sense to you that she would agree to the Partridge sisters, and then a minute later, after they're married, turn on them, and then agree to the Lawrence sisters right after that? That doesn't make any sense. Well, so I believe that the Lawrence sisters didn't have anything to do with Emma, and I believe that the Partridge sisters, I believe that they were coerced by Joseph F. Smith in 1869, because they quoted, in 1869, they made affidavits out of that very entry, they made an affidavit out of it. The very entry I read from August 13th or 16th, where it says that Emma had agreed to give him the Partridge sisters. And I believe that they read that, and Joseph F. Smith was telling Emily, well, isn't that what happened? Isn't that what happened? And I think they crafted the whole idea of the second marriage out of that to help get, because they had a problem in 1869. They had a problem explaining Emma.
Yeah, yeah.
What if Emma never agreed to any of them? That made Joseph look really bad.
Well, and to be clear, too, I mean, Brigham Young went on a concerted campaign to write Joseph Smith the way that best suited his purposes, and went to extreme lengths in order to do that, making public declarations against Emma Smith, Hale Smith Bideman at the time, because I think it was 1 or 2 years after Joseph's death that she married Louis Bideman. And having the book burning of Lucy Mack's biographical sketches, and, you know, acquiring the manuscript for it and it not being published until after Brigham Young's death, he had he made multiple concerted efforts in order to create a model of Joseph Smith that most worked with the theocracy that he was building, that would become this enshrined martyr that he could use for the persecution complex. And what required that to be done was obfuscating, changing, and vilifying certain aspects of his history. And Emma Smith not coming to Utah and making, public declarations against Brigham Young, that didn't bode well for Joseph Smith and Brigham Young being friends and Brigham Young being the rightful successor. So I do understand where the conflicts kind of arose between the two of them.
Yep.
And why Emma was so viciously vilified. With, her being the mother of a rival faction to the Brighamite Church, right? So that isn't a mystery whatsoever, but Emma's understanding and her role and her tacit approval or complete disapproval of specific marriages, just very specific instances within Nauvoo polygamy where she seems to have been very briefly okay with something and then reneging on her agreement because Joseph Smith was, unleashed. It's complicated. It's very challenging to try and wrap one's mind around.
Well, here's the thing. The evidence we have that Emma was involved in two marriages, two double marriages, is Lavina Walker, which is the sister of Joseph F. Smith. Mm-hmm. She gave an affidavit in 1869, and Emily Partridge. Now, her sister, Eliza Partridge, also gave an affidavit and stated that the same thing that Emily did. But here's the thing. Emily lived in Salt Lake City, and she gave her affidavit and said that the marriage took place on May 11th. Her sister Eliza lived in Fillmore. And 2 months later, she gives an affidavit and gives the same bogus date that we know is bogus. So what are the chances that there wasn't collusion going on there? 0. Okay, so then we have this. Lavina Walker. She says in 1869 that she was with Emma in 1846, and Emma confessed to her that she gave the Partridge sisters and the Lawrence sisters to Joseph. Emma's confession. Yet, it wasn't an affidavit. It was a certificate. It was not sworn under a notary. It was just signed by Joseph F. Smith and some relatives. Okay? This is the certificate that Lavina produces. And then on top of it all, there were two daughters of Samuel Smith and Hiram Smith, and they corresponded. One was Mary Smith Norman, and one was Ena Smith Coolbrith. And they corresponded with each other, and they talked about their family. Well, in 1911, Mary Norman wrote a letter to Ena Smith Coolbrith, and this is what she said. Lucy Walker has reiterated the disgusting story of her spiritual marriage to Joseph with pride. That spiritual marriage to Joseph is my explanation. So it says, Lucy Walker has reiterated the disgusting story with pride, and without a blush of shame. She was sister to Lauren Walker, who married cousin Lavina Smith, Uncle Hiram's oldest daughter. No, now she, Lavina, is not living. She has been dead some 12 or 15 years or more. Lauren Walker was Uncle Joseph's confidential servant. He stood very high in his Joseph's esteem and was trustworthy. He, although a very old man, was still alive the last I heard from him. They came west, and she, Lavina, died here. She, Lavina, made an affidavit. She made it of her own free will and accord because she had to. It was at that time the wisest thing for her to do. I was well acquainted with her and know what her real sentiments were. She was a fine woman, but had to yield to circumstances. I do not know anything definitely about the Partridge sisters. I had heard about them, but I never could get direct information. So what she's saying, basically, in my opinion, is that Lavina Walker was coerced into giving that statement about right. Emma, her affidavit. There's direct evidence that Joseph F. Smith was not totally honest in what he was doing in involving Emma Smith in these marriages. I have another one. When Eliza Partridge made her affidavits, she made 4 of them. There were 2 that mentioned Emma Smith, just like her sisters, and there were 2 that did not. And when Joseph F. Smith copied them into the affidavit book, he inserted Emma Smith's name, and the original affidavits don't have it. So, you know what? It might have got left out or whatever, but Joseph F. Smith, when he copied those affidavits, was dishonest. Yeah. So I'm of the opinion that there was some shenanigans going on with those affidavits. I accept most of them on face value. I think most of them are good, honest affidavits that people were involved with this. But when it comes to the Emma Smith stuff, I don't think we can trust them. That's my opinion.
Let's draw a line really quickly, because I think there's something important that you saying that some of these affidavits may have been tweaked, may have been influenced by Joseph F. Smith. That does not immediately follow that all of the affidavits that prove Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy are therefore false or are therefore fabricated, right? So oftentimes it's said that it was all a conspiracy by Brigham Young and Joseph Smith fought polygamy. That's the title of a book, that Joseph Smith was never practicing polygamy. It was a later fabrication by Brigham Young to justify his own carnal desires. That Joseph Smith was a strict monogamist, advocated for just strict monogamy, and that you talked about it earlier, him parading through the streets and decrying polygamy. That's often trotted out that, there's another, I think there's a behind the scenes conversation that he had, I think, with William Clayton as well, saying that if we don't root out polygamy, it will destroy us, something to that effect. There's a number of little quotes that are taken, and then the claims that there was a grand orchestrated conspiracy against Joseph Smith's legacy after his death, that he wasn't practicing polygamy. So just don't jump down and slide down that slippery slope. Don't say a couple of these affidavits show signs that there was coercion or that they are slightly less than 100% trustworthy, and then immediately leap to the conclusion that Joseph Smith was a monogamist and that, it was all a fabrication. It was all a massive conspiracy by Brigham Young, because that is patently absurd, and that requires ignoring the mountain of other evidence. If you try and make that logical leap, you're going to fall into the black hole of absurdity. So what do you say when a person does happen to claim, well, Joseph Smith practiced monogamy only, strict monogamist, and he didn't like polygamy. He tried to fight polygamy, but Brigham Young and John C. Bennett and William Smith, they were just deluded. They were doing their own thing. They were trying to justify it by trying to paint Joseph Smith as a polygamist at a later time. How, Johnny, do you personally deal with that?
I can't. The evidence is just overwhelming that Joseph was involved with polygamy. It's overwhelming. So, I've had discussions with people that don't believe it, and usually they don't go very well, because everybody, they've made up their mind. It's like Oliver Cowdery was the liar, when about Fanny Alger. It's never, never Joseph's fault. It was never Joseph that, got into all these situations on his own. It was the fault of everyone else. But Joseph was involved in it. Yeah, I mean, they would have. Why, one of their tenets that they put out is that, the whole Clayton diary was forged. Okay, if you're going to forge Clayton's diary, why make it so obscure? I mean, there's nothing really. I mean, there's some stuff in there, but I mean, it's not. There's a lot of ambiguity in there. So it's like, and why not make it crystal clear what he was doing? But they don't. Why not put more wives in there? Why not put, that he married this person and married that person? Why try to use different code words for things and like Clayton did and all that? It doesn't make any sense. It's senseless jargon.
And it also ignores all of the journal entries and all of the poems by Eliza Snow, and all the journal entries of other women, all of the sworn affidavits. It forces, that mindset forces you to ignore such a mountain of evidence that, I mean, I'm glad you said it the way you did, that I don't deal with it, because you're not arguing on rational bases anymore.
Yeah. And every time I get into a conversation like that, I usually regret it, because it just devolves into, I just don't believe it, and okay, fine. If you don't want to, everybody has the right to believe what they want. If you want to believe Joseph didn't practice polygamy, okay. But, I don't see it.
Well, and that's why I so much wanted to preface our conversation in part one by saying that if a person wants to have multiple sexual partners, cool. Go for it. Informed consenting adults. Those are your 3 criteria. You fill those out. Have fun with as many people as you want, as long as everybody's on the up and up and everybody understands what's going on and is well informed. Everybody's consenting and everybody are adults. But when it comes to saying Joseph Smith was this pious prophet, that he could do no wrong, that everybody was conspiring against him because... What? Because they were all led by the devil, because Brigham Young was of the devil, whatever the case may be. It was all the power of the work of the adversary. You introduced so many more variables and non sequiturs that we're no longer having a conversation that's grounded in reality. And if you're just trying to view the evidence and let the evidence lead you to conclusions, then, Joseph Smith's polygamy is long and storied and colorful and fascinating and complicated, and it hurt a lot of people. It caused so much damage. It altered people's lives from then forward, but it also created an entire community and an entire culture where they challenged the societal norms of a Protestant America, of 19th century Protestant America, where they built a theocracy based some part on the ability of one man to marry multiple wives. And, they challenged a lot of norms. I'm not saying any of these are good things. I'm just saying that is what happened. That is what exists, that the norms were challenged, and that the territory of Utah came under heavy scrutiny at various times throughout its history because of those challenged norms. And all of that was catalyzed by Joseph Smith being a cavalier sexual deviant, and maybe deviant is the wrong word there, but some of his relationships definitely lend themselves to that word being used. But let's just say a sexual contrarian. He wasn't to be bound by the relationship ideals of his day. So lots to take apart, lots to think about, a lot to consider.
I'd like to say something about what you said about how destructive a lot of this was to people. Here's how I look at Joseph Smith's marriages and to these women, and I have a very dismal view of how Joseph treated these women. He kept them in secret.
Yeah.
He didn't inform them, about each other. A lot of them he kept secret from each other. I mean, Emily claims that, she didn't know that her sister had married Joseph, and her sister didn't know that she had. Joseph was doing this behind his wife's back, and he was getting involved with all these women. But when it came time, And you can say, okay, Joseph was an honest man who was honestly trying to fulfill the commandment that God gave him to practice polygamy. And he was a pious guy and did everything right. Well, how do you explain this story?
Yeah.
The Partridge sisters, what happened to them? What happened to them?
And
Emma Smith, in September of 1843, after this whole blow up with Flora Woodworth and Eliza Snow and all of these women, she's kicking them all out of the mansion, and it came time for the Partridge sisters to go, and Emma said, "You gotta go." And here's how Emily described it. When we went in, Joseph was there. His countenance was the perfect picture of despair. I cannot remember all that passed at that time, but she, Emma, insisted that we should promise to break our covenants that we had made before God. Joseph asked her if we made the promises she required, if she would cease to trouble us and not persist in our marrying someone else. She made the promise. Joseph came to us and shook hands with us, and the understanding was that all was ended between us. I, for one, meant to keep the promise I was forced to make, to break the covenant with Joseph. Joseph shakes their hand and says, "It's all over, girls." Emily continues. Some might think that Emma was justified in the course she took. She might have been in some cases, but when the Lord commands, his word is not to be trifled with. After our interview was over, we went downstairs. Joseph came into the room where I was, said, "How do you feel, Emily?" My heart still being hard, I answered him rather short that I expected that I felt like anybody would under the circumstances. He said, "My hands are tied." And he looked as if he would sink into the earth. I knew he spoke truly, and my heart was melted. All my hard feelings was gone in a moment towards him, but I had no time to speak, for he was gone. Bye-bye. Emma was on his track and came in as he went out. She said, "Emily, what did Joseph say to you?" I answered that he had asked me how I felt. She said, "You might as well tell me, for I am determined that a stop shall be put to these things, and I want you to tell me what he says to you." I replied, "I shall not tell you. He can say what he pleases to me, and I shall not report it to you. There has been mischief enough made by doing that. I am as sick of these things as you can be." I said in a tone, and she knew I meant it, Emma could not rest until she had gotten us out of the house, and then she was not satisfied, but wanted us to leave the city. She offered to give the money to pay our expenses if we would go. We consulted Joseph, and he said we might make a visit to some of our relatives who are living up the river 200 or 300 miles. So we agreed to go, and she gave us $10. Joseph said it was insufficient and for us not to go, so we gave it up and returned the money to Emma. Emily wound up staying with the Lyons and took care of their child. And Eliza went and stayed with, I believe, Agnes Smith, one of his other wives. So Joseph put him, and Emily says, "I never saw him again, except once I caught a glimpse of him on the way to Carthage."
Wow.
So Joseph never had another thing to do with these girls after shaking their hands and saying, "It's all over," because his hands were tied.
Yep.
Does that appeal to you as a sincere person who is trying to make this work, that really loves these girls? This is what I don't see.
And
I don't see it at all.
And I want to just add a little commentary as well, because if following the God that you worship, that Joseph Smith was worshiping, that he was claiming to speak for, requires this much lying, bold-faced lying, this much pain, this much lack of trustworthiness, this much just underhanded dealings, that is either an insensitive God or somebody who is just out for their own aggrandizement and trying to acquire as many wives as possible. Now, I mean, let me be clear, like, these are just my ways of rationally tackling this issue. And when I view Joseph's past of Nauvoo polygamy, I see somebody who is not concerned with the well-being of other people so much as he is with the construction of his own empire and his own harem of wives and concubines. And if you are worshiping the same God that he was worshiping, that is the product of that God. That is Well, needless to say, I guess I'll conclude by saying I'm really glad that I personally don't have to reconcile belief in that God, because I don't think that I could do it. There are just too many contradictions. There's too much darkness and too much evil wrapped up into this situation and into so many of these relationships that I cannot reconcile those with a benevolent, omnipotent force that moves and shapes our cosmos.
Well, here's the thing. Emily's tragedy wasn't over yet. She gets pawned off on, the apostles took Smith's wives, and they went up to all these women and said, you're going to marry us. We're going to have children by you, and they're going to go to Joseph Smith in the hereafter. And Emily marries Brigham Young, gets pregnant like that. Bam, she's pregnant. She has this child, carries it across the plain. She gets to Utah. In 1877, she writes, different ones have told me what they heard President Young say. Sister Emily ought to take care of herself, and he did not intend to do anything for her much longer. No. And the men in his employ would hardly let me have any food, saying it was President Young's orders. And one man said he knew it was hard work for me to get anything, as no one wanted to do anything for me, and said, I actually have to lie when I bring the brand for your cow and tell William it was for someone else. And I and my family have to take insult upon insult from the hands until I feel as if I want to be free from such things. When I go to President Young for anything, he seems annoyed and perhaps will give me no answer. All these things, with many others as disagreeable, have caused me to worry. And I have laid awake many nights thinking and contriving some way to get along independent of President Young, but being in poor health and not being able to work, I cannot do it. She takes comfort in her family. This is the trial. This is how these women were treated. It's disgusting. And then let me close with this, because this is tragic. Here's Emily writing years later. Today I've been thinking. My mind goes back to days gone by. And what do I find? Can I find anything so pleasant that I could wish to live it over again? Or even to dwell upon it in thought with any degree of satisfaction? No, I cannot. My life has been like a panorama of disagreeable pictures. As I scan them over one by one, they bring no joy, and I invariably wind up with tears. I have been heart hungry all my life, always hoping against hope, until the years are nearly spent and hope is dead for this life, but bright for the next. And then I ask myself, what greater good thing have I done that I should hope for better things in the next world? Or what great trial or exploit can I recount, like many others perhaps, that will bring honor and greatness? I can only sum it up in one word. That is, I am a woman, or if that is not enough, I am a mother, and still more, I am, as the world calls it, a spiritual wife of early days, when public opinion was like an avalanche, burying all such beneath its oppressive weight. Some will understand what it is to be a woman, a mother, or an unloved spiritual wife. I can't even begin to understand what this woman went through. But I want to add this because it's really, really important. The next day, 2 days later, she wrote this. Yesterday, I was in a dark mood. Today, I'm looking for the bright spots. Although they may be few and far between, they should not be overlooked. And among my greatest blessings, I class the fates that I am a mother and was a spiritual wife. How conflicted was Emily Partridge? She, on some days, she's in the dumps about it because she has had nothing, heart hungry her whole life. But then she reflects on it and thinks about her children and counts her blessings that she was a spiritual wife. It's so, the confusion there is just so tragically evident. It's horrible.
And the resulting trauma, the resulting anxiety that you can read between those lines, and depression that must have overwhelmed her, never having a loved one that she can come to, never having a husband that comes home to cook a meal for, only maybe once in a while interacting with a husband that she shares with 40 other wives, and never getting to feel what it's like to actually have a family of her own. You
know what Brigham Young's salary was? $10,000 a year from the church. And he couldn't give this woman food?
Yeah.
He couldn't take care of so many of them were abandoned when they got older because they weren't their favorite wives. They all had their favorites. It was so arbitrary and capricious. It's like, what does Emily have to offer? She's no Eliza Snow. She's not a poetess. She's not a Relief Society president. She's not like some of these women who were in Young's good graces. She wasn't Mary Ann Angel, his first one. Oh no, his first number one wife. She was just the poor sod that married him because Joseph died and he got stuck with her. But she was young then, so she was desirable. But when she got older, who wants her?
And beyond that,
they dumped them.
Beyond that too, she was no Anne Eliza Webb, where she had been so broken and degraded as a human being her entire life as a secondary wife. She never had the wherewithal or the understanding or the cognitive abilities to fight against it the way wife number 19 did. To bring him to court, she never had the ability to do anything. She never had the ability to fight for her own rights. It broke her.
Here's the thing, though. I read that paragraph over and over again. I've read it so many times, and it is one of the most eloquent pieces of prose that I have read in my life. That it's elegant. It is just inspiring, but it's so sad. It's just sad. But if Emily could write like that, she had talent. But did anyone see it? Did anyone help her develop it? No, I don't think so.
She was robbed of all opportunities that a normal life would have provided for her. And that right there, everything that we just discussed, we spent these 2 episodes discussing the high-level overview of so many of these marriages, talking about the doctrine and the theological impact of it, the logistical constraints trying to hide it. But we have only just scratched the surface at the very end of this conversation of what the real-world impact of these relationships were, and how people's lives were tragically altered in ways that we can never imagine because they agreed to a system of marriage and relationship that just simply suppressed them and did not afford them all of the opportunities that they could have had they otherwise gone a more traditional route of monogamy and a standard family. These people were robbed of something. And they were robbed for the selfish aggrandizement of very few wealthy religious elites. That is the real-world impact of everything we've discussed for these 2 episodes.
Yep.
We've talked a lot. There's a lot to process. I hope the listeners, you all have a bit to process. Of course, I want to send it over to Johnny, our guest, for any concluding thoughts? Anything you want to say?
No, I think I did. I just did it. I'm going to end it with Emily Partridge's statements because I think it's really important that people understand how she felt, how alone she was at the last, and that she still within herself found something to be proud of and something to latch onto, her family, her children. But that she was literally dragged through the mud for her entire life because of this principle that was practiced. And I don't think that they called it one of the twin relics of barbarism for no reason. It just doesn't, it's not an appealing doctrine. It's not, everything about it is wrong. And I think that people should think about that and why they would revere a man who brought all this about. I don't have, Joseph Smith was a complicated guy, but with this, he lost it, in my opinion.
A lot to process, of course. Johnny, once again, I want to give you the opportunity to plug where people can find you if they want to explore anything that you're doing. And do you have anything in the works coming together that might be out in the next year, the next 5 years, 10 years that you want to amp people up for?
I'm writing a book called Spiritual Wives. No surprise there. And I have an article I'm finishing up on Emma Smith and those 1869 affidavits.
Fantastic. And of course, the blog is Mormonite Sphere. Is that right?
Mormonite Musings.
Mormonite Musings. And you will find a link to that in the show notes. Once again, Johnny, I want to thank you so much for sharing so much with us today. This podcast is produced with the help of Julie Briscoe as production assistant and director of social media, and Brian Ziegenhagen as audio engineer. Music is produced by Jason Camo from aloststateofmind.com and is used with permission. Naked Mormonism is a production of Ground Gnome Studios, LLC, copyright 2018, all rights reserved.